Hi everyone. Is it fine if I speak in English? I actually made a presentation in English to make sure everyone can get it. So it's, as you'll see, it's been a blueprint. It's a very new presentation, so bear with me and be gentle. I had a similar presentation at the FIC in Lille months ago, and I wanted to update on this and kind of have a new wireframe. So since the last time I was at FIC, we were discussing about the potential breach of submarine cables. And as you know, things goes fast, and we went from supposition to reality. So the question is, what's going on right now? If you think about the internet, and I'd like you to think about 3 different time frames. The first act, what was? The second act we're living in, that is what is right now happening. And the third act, potentially the last act of the internet, what will be. So very briefly, I've been doing several things in my life. I was a hacker in the 80s, I was a journalist, an entrepreneur. I've been working with gut advising, and one day I woke up and wondered, why do I not understand technology anymore? And the response was, technology is now geopolitics. And it took me a while to understand this. And what I'd like to do here is to briefly tell you what are my different thoughts on the subject. So let's dive in. So the first act of the internet was basically an expansion. It was just a few computers connected, then it became bigger, and then it went over the US, becoming this large thing that we all love, that is the internet. So the internet expanded from the US, but also in some ways inherited all the laws from the Cold War. There's a lot of things like the FISA and all these things that actually were designed during the Cold War against Russia, and these things and all this is available within the internet. The other thing that is interesting is, starting in the 90s, we started deregulating every sovereign telecom networks. Remember, in France, in Japan, in Europe, they were owned by the government, they were sovereign, and then we said, oh, let's open it up. And at the time, everyone was sure of one thing: the value is in the network. That's what we thought, because I don't know if you remember what happened with WorldCom, who went from being the biggest bust, probably one of the biggest corporate malpractice in the history of time. And basically, we felt like, oh, the value is there, and it's not there. So the reality is we discovered in the mid-2000s that the value was actually in the software. And that's what happened with the second act, the act that we're still living in, the consolidation phase. We went from something expanding, and now we're going back and slowly becoming 10 to 5, few companies. And the software is the value because we had a few companies like Google and Facebook that were just startups, kids in a garage or in a dorm room, that became big tech. How did this happen? This is a very interesting process. So it's something new I'm working on, that is the idea of a cloud capital. So what is cloud capital? It's very simple. CPUs and GPUs, proprietary software, but you can rent. If you take a company like Google, this is the most incredible business model of our time. They kind of made it so incredibly smart and profitable. Facebook came out, different model. Apple came out, different model. But at the end of the day, because you have CPUs and GPUs, and because you have built your own software, you can let people pay. So in the consumer space, it's not exactly like that. You have the same thing, proprietary and CPU and GPU. You generate attention, goes against advertising, and then they pay to have access to the user. So not exactly the same way as in cloud computing, but pretty much the value is similar. So in two cases, you either pay the rent or you generate the rent and collect it. And if you look at how the global powers of the last 10 years have been organized, in some ways, it's mostly the US and China have pretty much figured out how to collect the rents. Everyone else is renting. You're renting your cloud, you're renting the advertising infrastructure, you're renting access to data, you're renting AI, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone else is a renter. That's the question around digital sovereignty is not only a question about how you do get your data. The question is, can I create my own cloud capital as a country? Do my companies within my country are able to generate that revenue? So the way big tech has been designed is that they optimize this. That's the obsession of large companies, optimizing this. So you constantly have new services. First you had Facebook giving you attention, you had Gmail, and then you moved to Instagram acquiring companies, WhatsApp, because you need constantly new services. But at the end of the day, the idea is that you optimize, you move on, you increase the value. Apple, with this, created the mobile cloud capital. It's basically, you actually pay for it, and then they monetize it for you. It's kind of an interesting thing. So they figure out a different model, but at the end of the day, it's similar to the same. And everything has been designed for maximum extraction. So when you think about how you build a product when it's global, it has to go through that idea of that how do we maximize the extraction, how do we collect rent, how do we collect data. Of course, governments are trying to regulate that. But the problem is they fail, and they fail for a very simple reason is that someone else, instead of building new clouds and alternative options, we try to regulate cloud capital. And we have to be clear, the large companies have been extremely good at figuring out how to optimize fiscally, generating so much revenues that you don't even know if it's money the way that it's designed, it's intellectual property, it goes through different countries. You basically are not able to collect any tax. And the other thing about this rule is to make it extremely profitable, you have to get over 1 billion users. That's what Google, Facebook, Apple, and all these companies are doing. Because then you create a generic product in 5 continents that works exactly the same. So it doesn't matter if you're Indian, French, America, you're collecting the same amount of money. The algorithms are just the same. So what's happening right now with AI is interesting because LLMs hope to be, for the moment it's not exactly the case because it's costing a lot of money, to increase the value. So maybe we'll be able to collect more rent. Think about it. Think about a company like Google, the valuation of a company like Google or Microsoft, they're worth more than all the companies they serve data for. So suddenly you wonder what's really the value. Is it your ability to generate this capital, this cloud capital, or is it the data that people own? There's 7 companies right now on the Western side who dominate, and they all have different strategies. For example, Tesla has decided to move from being a car company to a cloud capital company. They have bought an insane amount of CPUs and GPUs. They have this thing called Dojo, and eventually they will run the intelligence of other car companies, and they will extract rent in a different way that Meta is doing, and NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is doing chipset, but they're also doing a lot of software. They don't want to stay in the chipset mode. They want to go up and extract cloud capital as well. Google, Amazon, and the others, you actually know how it works. The Magnificent Seven, by the way, that's the new name. It's not GAFAM anymore. So there's only one thing that can disrupt that: geopolitical instability. That's the final or third act, depending on how you call it. It's the breakup phase. This is what we are observing slowly right now. The fact that because the world that used to operate exactly the same way, so you have the same product, you deploy everywhere, there's no problem. Suddenly, it's not the same thing. You have different regulations. People don't want the same things. Some of the components, like the chips, won't be available everywhere, so suddenly it becomes complicated to have global services. And as you know, the fact that social media is not only a technology, it's not only software, it has an impact on our emotions, it has an impact on populations. Basically, by running the world as if it was a simulation, the real world against a simulation, we have created this situation where we are right now, where most countries have to deal with issues. Think about what happened in Slovakia just a few weeks ago with the elections, and now they're pulling out of Ukraine. Just announced a day ago how all these is breaking and creating trouble all around. There's also this idea that is what we call anticipatory computing, the idea that because we have so much access to data, we can anticipate basically the future of cloud capital, the money that we are going to generate by understanding how people are. And this has a direct impact on how governments operate. So the problem of this is that cloud capital that used to be a global thing is now becoming more regionalized. You're going to start seeing companies that want to operate only in Europe, only in China. It's already the case for a lot of them. Only in the US. And we're going to start looking at a regionalization. So the model is changing. The other thing is, of course, that with the Splinternet and the idea that countries are trying to pull out from this. Like, you know, we have in the previous presentation that you can see on the website of the FIC, I was talking about how you have internet blackout. That is the easiest way to basically cut the internet when there's a problem, because you don't have access to the software, you don't know how to do it, it's a deal breaker. And most of the countries right now are figuring out, do we want to stay in this global thing that we don't control, or do we need to regionalize, or even at the country level, figuring this out? Remember, 36 countries are disconnected partially or completely from the internet as we speak today. So the question now is, where is the value? In the first era, the value was in the networks. We spent billions putting fiber everywhere. And then the value was in the software. We created generic product that works everywhere and generate cash. Take your phone, Instagram is making money every 5 pictures you see because it's advertising. So we created incredible money value making. In this new world, it's potential that the value will be in contingencies and resilience. Think about one thing. If the cables I was talking earlier are broken, how do we connect to the internet? How do we keep connecting to the internet? There's a company that all of us know that is Starlink, that kind of figured it out. And suddenly every country is thinking now, we need a backup on satellites. Because if we have any problem, we may not disconnect from the internet, but we might go back to the days of the 90s, you know, when the internet was quite slow. So there's so many things like edge computing. I come with my own internet. I design my own internet for my company. We're seeing a lot of these, by the way, in theater of war, like in Ukraine, where they have their own network because you cannot trust the official network of the place. Private 5G and things like that. So we're going to also see regulation that is going to make sure that on a regional place we are good with what we want. In a way, the AI Act, the GDPR, all of that are some ways to say, if you want the internet to work here, and we want companies from Europe to work here, these are the rules you have to follow. So the question we all need to ask ourselves is basically, the internet as we knew it, the global internet is about to disappear. It's going to transform into something else. The question is, are we ready for that? And what is our strategy? And the interesting thing we see through when you look at the strategy of the big, large companies, they're starting to understand that. When you see Apple moving slowly back the fabrication to Vietnam, to the US, when you see that you need different strategies, different type of engineers. And this is going to be, I believe, the most important question we all have to ask ourselves. And I think that's it. Thank you so much.